unbaked dough, smoothing the edges of the figures lined up on the wooden tray. Beside her, Grandpa sifted more flour over the surface, his movements slow and practiced. They worked in a rhythmic silence, the only sound the soft scrape of metal against wood. Granny picked up a small, leftover piece of dough and rolled it between her palms. She pressed it flat, shaped it into a perfect circle, and placed it at the very center of the tray. It was smaller than the others, round and simple. Grandpa nodded, reaching for the heavy iron handle of the oven door. The heat rolled out to meet them, dry and intense. With steady hands, Granny slid the tray onto the middle rack. The oven door swung shut with a muffled click. They stood back, watching the dial, waiting for the timer to begin its steady, ticking countdown. The kitchen felt still, the anticipation heavy in the air as the warmth intensified around the hearth. A sharp, metallic chime cut through the kitchen silence. The timer had reached its end. Grandpa reached for the oven handle, his fingers brushing the iron, when the door creaked open of its own accord. A puff of steam rolled into the room, but it was not the scent of baking that caught their attention. The small, round cookie on the center of the tray jolted. It stood up, shook off the loose flour from its surface, and vaulted over the edge of the tray. Granny gasped, reaching out, but her hand grasped only empty air. The cookie hit the wooden table with a soft thud and sprinted toward the open kitchen door. Its pace was frantic, a blur of motion that defied the laws of the oven. It sang a high, rhythmic tune, a melody of defiance that echoed against the stone walls. Granny and Grandpa remained frozen, their mouths slightly parted, watching the tiny figure scramble over the threshold and onto the garden path. The kitchen door swung shut behind it, leaving the two of them alone in the sudden, ringing quiet of the room. The cookie was gone, already deep into the world outside. The meadow stretched out, a vast expanse of green that felt like a playground. The cookie hit the grass, his small form barely visible as he wove between stalks. A cow, startled by the sudden movement, lowered her head and broke into a heavy trot. She lunged forward, her hooves thumping against the soft earth, but the cookie simply zigzagged. He darted left, then right, dancing between her massive front legs with effortless precision. The cow skidded, her momentum carrying her past the mark as she turned in confusion. Before she could recover, a horse from the nearby fence line caught the motion and charged. The ground shook under the horse's gallop, a rhythmic thunder that threatened to crush the small runner. The cookie did not falter. He sprinted toward a section of the field littered with jagged, uneven rocks. He squeezed through narrow crevices where the horse could not follow, his path unpredictable and sharp. The horse reared, frustrated, pacing the perimeter of the stone cluster while the cookie vaulted over a final ledge. He was already 30 yards ahead, rolling toward the tree line. The large animals stood in the center of the meadow, watching the small, defiant speck disappear into the thicket, their breath coming in short, heavy puffs. The forest swallowed the light, turning the world into a maze of shadows and damp leaves. The cookie skidded across a patch of moss, his pace barely slowing as the trees closed in. Suddenly, a massive shape lunged from behind a thick oak. It was a bear, claws scraping the bark as it descended toward the path. The cookie did not stop. He hit a fallen log, launched himself into a high arc, and cleared the obstruction while the bear crashed into the wood. The impact sent vibrations through the forest floor, but the cookie was already gaining distance. He darted through the undergrowth, his small form a blurred brown streak against the dark soil. A clearing appeared ahead, and a bunny crouched in the center, twitching its nose, ready to block the exit. As the cookie approached, he pivoted, circling the animal with dizzying speed. The rabbit turned, then turned again,
spinning until it lost its footing and tumbled into a mound of ferns. The cookie did not look back.
He bounced over a tangle of roots and dived into the thickest part of the brush.
Safe in the shadows, he felt the thrill of the chase. He was faster than the forest, and he knew it.
The thicket thinned, giving way to a narrow strip of dirt at the forest edge. The cookie rolled out, expecting another chase, but the clearing was unnervingly still. No birds sang. No wind stirred the dry grass. He slowed his pace, the silence pressing against him like a physical weight. He stopped, his small frame poised for a sprint, scanning the perimeter. Then, from the shadow of a gray boulder, a figure emerged. It was a fox, standing perfectly motionless. It did not lunge, it did not growl. It simply watched, head tilted slightly, its gaze fixed and unblinking. The cookie took a half-step back, his earlier confidence wavering. The fox took a slow, deliberate step forward, its paws making no sound on the packed earth. When it spoke, the voice was a low, melodic purr that seemed to vibrate in the stagnant air. "You move with such grace," the fox said, its tone smooth and calculated. "I have watched you from the shadows, listening to the rhythm of your run." The cookie stayed frozen, his instincts screaming for him to turn, but the fox's presence held him in place. This was not a pursuit of speed, but a game of patience, and the air between them grew heavy with a new, quiet danger. The fox leaned back, tilting its head with a look of feigned frustration. It tapped a paw against the dry earth, sighing as if the simple act of listening were a burden. "My ears are not what they once were," the fox murmured, the sound barely rising above the rustle of leaves. "Could you come closer? I fear I am missing the melody of your song." The cookie stood his ground, his small frame vibrating with uncertainty. The air felt colder here, stripped of the warmth of the meadow. He looked at the flat, gray rock sitting just inches from where the fox rested. It was a tempting spot, high enough to offer a clear view, but far too close to the predator. The fox lowered its head, resting its chin against its paws, and closed its eyes in a display of harmlessness. The cookie took one tentative roll forward, then another. The distance between them shrank. He could hear the fox's rhythmic breathing, a low sound that seemed to pull him in like a tide. He reached the edge of the rock and paused, his balance precarious. He was inches away now, standing on the threshold of a trap, his senses overwhelmed by the predator's proximity. The cookie stood on the edge of the rock, his circular form steady, but his mind raced. He watched the fox, who remained still as stone. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Behind the fox, the bushy tail gave a sharp, involuntary twitch. It was a singular, rhythmic beat, inconsistent with the creature's feigned slumber. The cookie looked closer. Beneath the fur, the fox's shoulder muscles were not relaxed. They were bunched, tight as drawn wire, ready to snap. The realization hit like a physical shock. The fox was not listening to his song. It was calculating the distance of the pounce. The fox's eyelids flickered open, revealing a sliver of sharp, gold-flecked light. The predator's head dipped, the jaw loosening just enough to expose a glint of teeth. The air in the clearing grew sharp and thin. The fox's rear legs shifted, digging into the dirt to gain purchase for a sudden, lethal launch. The cookie felt the ground beneath him vibrate. The fox was no longer waiting. It was coiling. The trap was closing. Every muscle in the cookie's frame tightened, his senses screaming that the time for hesitation had passed. He had one chance to move. The fox lunged, jaws snapping shut on empty air. But the cookie was already gone. Propelled by a sudden, violent burst of energy, he didn't turn back. He rolled, hit the base of the rock, and launched himself into the air like a skipping stone. The world blurred into a streak of green and brown. He soared over the narrow, rushing stream, the water misting his underside as he cleared the bank. The fox scrambled to follow, claws tearing at the mud, but it skidded to a halt at the water's edge. The stream was too wide, the current too treacherous for the predator to cross. The cookie hit the wooden slats of the bridge with a solid, resonant thud. He didn't stop. He rolled to the center of the span, his momentum carrying him forward. He looked back. The fox was pacing the bank, its golden eyes fixed on the bridge, but it did not step onto the planks. The predator's shoulders slumped. The hunt was over. The cookie stood on the bridge, his frame steady, the distance between them now an unbridgeable divide. He had won the space he needed to survive. The sound of heavy breathing broke the silence. A moment later, two figures appeared at the forest edge. It was Granny and Grandpa. They stopped where the path met the stream, their chests heaving, their faces flushed from the long pursuit. The cookie tensed, ready to bolt, his edges curled for a quick roll. He braced for the familiar reach of hands, but the hands did not move. Instead, Granny lowered her arms. and Grandpa leaned on his knees, catching his breath. They looked at the cookie, then at each other, and finally, they offered a slow, gentle wave. No lunging, no snapping fingers, just a quiet acknowledgement. The cookie relaxed his stance, the tension leaving his round frame. He looked at the distant fox, then back at the couple. He had spent his existence running, believing his speed was his only shield. But as he watched them turn away, he understood the truth. Speed had kept him away from the oven, but it was his awareness, his ability to map the terrain, to spot the twitch in the fox, to calculate the leap that had kept him free. He raised a small edge in a wave back. He was no longer a target to be claimed. He was a traveler who had found his own way. The bridge faded into the distance as the cookie turned toward the open road. He no longer rolled with the frantic urgency of a hunted creature. His pace was steady, rhythmic, and purposeful.
As he entered the first village, he began to hum a melody, a song of streams, foxtails, and open bridges. The villagers stopped their work to listen. They did not reach for him. They opened their gates and offered him the path forward. He rolled through the marketplace, his voice growing stronger, weaving the story of his escape into the air. Children followed his trail, laughing as he bounced over cobblestones. He was no longer a snack to be captured or a prize to be won.
He was a traveler who brought the spirit of the wild road to every doorstep. From one valley to the next, his legend expanded. In every hearth and home, the song of the cookie became a reminder that ingenuity outweighed hunger. He rolled toward the horizon, a golden blur of independence, leaving behind only laughter and the echoes of his journey. The road ahead was endless, and for the first time, he was exactly where he chose to be.